Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Wausau PD Podcast. I am Todd Bate. I'm the Deputy Chief at the Police Department. On a lot of our previous episodes of the podcast, we've talked about like different programs, different law enforcement themes, things of that nature. But I think one of the really great things about our department are the individuals that make up our staff. So we were able to meet some of them a little bit more in detail in the past, like we met Detective Bertram and a few of our others. And today we are going to have more of an in-depth conversation with Officer Claire Ostrowski. So Claire came to us from a previous department, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that, about her past law enforcement experience, what she's doing nowadays. I don't know, all kinds of things. We're just going to learn about Claire and have a conversation. Claire, thanks for being here. So you did come to us from another law enforcement agency. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about like years of experience, kind of what your background is, and then we'll maybe jump into some other details and learn a little bit more about what you're doing nowadays.
I'm just thinking, I bounced around a lot. I'm originally from Grafton, which most people have no idea where that is. Usually people know where Cedarburg is a little bit more. They're suburbs of Milwaukee, Wausau County. That's where I grew up. I went to school at UW Eau Claire, looking for different law enforcement agencies that had openings, and I found a town that I had never heard of, or a city, rather, Fitchburg, which is also a suburb of Madison. I realize after working there why people don't know where it is for the most part is because they don't have their own zip code. They share Verona, Oregon's, and Madison's. So it's a suburb that's just to the south, mostly, of Madison, in between Oregon, Stoughton, Verona. Those are kind of the surrounding ones as well. I worked there for about 6.5 years-ish. I got hired right out of college in 2014. I was there for several years as a patrol officer, and then I came here in December of 2020.
Gotcha. So UW Eau Claire, like, did you study criminal justice, or like what was the program that you studied, course of study?
I studied criminal justice. That ended up being my major. I bounced around for my first couple of years, having absolutely no idea what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Almost did speech pathology, and then completely changed gears to criminal justice after taking just a smidge. I took a couple of classes, and I was absolutely amazed, and I wanted to learn more, and then I absolutely fell in love with it and kept going with it.
What was the draw then? Like, what was it about the law enforcement topic that kept you interested on that path?
I don't know exactly what it was. I remember that taking the classes, I just remember being excited to study those classes and go to those classes, and there were other classes like political science or math where I dreaded going to. And criminal justice was one where I was just excited to go to class. I don't remember the exact aspect that drew me in. I think there was kind of like an air of mystery, and also growing up, Law and Order SVU, favorite show, like I feel like a lot of people. And I felt like it would be a really fun thing to learn, and it's different, and nobody in my family was in law enforcement, so it was something that was a completely different path that I didn't know anything about, and so I wanted to kind of immerse myself and learn about it.
And that's what I was going to ask. It's not like you were following the family business or anything like that. Just kind of went out on your own and thought, hey, this is a great way to make a living and to help other people, and it's never dull, right? So what's the total law enforcement experience you have now?
I hit my 10 years in May of 2024, so
a decade of experience now at a couple different agencies.
Yeah.
Well, let's, that kind of set the stage for us to learn a little bit more about you. But going back to maybe your previous agency, you had like 6-ish years there, a little more than that. How do you think that helped prepare you for, more and more years in law enforcement? Like what kind of trajectory did that put you on? You're there, you're new, you're right out of college, and you're learning the trade. And like, what were some important lessons you learned at your previous agency about this new career of yours?
Well, I can say starting in law enforcement, I never anticipated staying here more than a couple of years in this field.
And tell like, where would you have gone? Like, what would you have?
So when I was in college, I did an internship with the Eau Claire Juvenile Detention Center. And I loved the juvenile justice system and the director of the programs for all of the kids. I shadowed them a couple of times, and I thought that that would be an amazing career, is to be a part of that. And talking to everybody, that was what I was told would be the best way to then move into that position. Is everybody said, for anything in criminal justice, start in law enforcement. That's going to be the best place to give you your openings with various places, and what would give you an idea of maybe what you wanted to do more and get your connections and everything. And so that was what my anticipation was, is to start in law enforcement for a couple of years and then move towards the juvenile justice system. And then when I was in the Madison area, I also was amazed with the Safe Harbor program, which here is the Child Advocacy Center. It's the same kind of deal. It's for the forensic interviews with children. I also fell in love with that kind of a program and thought maybe that's the other route I was going to go. And then I just continued with my years in law enforcement. And I just realized that I never actually want to leave this job. I think the biggest thing that I fell in love with is that everything is different every single day. You never know what you're going to get. You have endless opportunities for learning. And there isn't a lot that would limit where you want to go in the career. Because when I started, I was patrol. And then at Fitchburg, I became an instructor and a field training officer, and I started going kind of those avenues. Coming here, I just did the humane officer animal control training, and then I've also done investigation trainings, and there are endless opportunities, and I think that that's probably my favorite thing that I've learned about this job and has kept me here and probably will keep me here for the rest of my career.
Awesome. So we definitely will touch base on some of those different tangents that you've been exploring and how you've been able to specialize in some other areas. And we're glad that you stayed in law enforcement. So it's not that you dislike kids. Let's clarify that, right?
Correct. Okay. I love kids.
There you go.
I love kids.
Because you still get to do that too. So.
Yeah, I get to still deal with kids, just not in the most direct way that I had thought about before.
Yeah. So you came here to Wausau PD at sort of a weird time. You and I were talking about this the other day. Like, we were just coming out of this kind of wonky COVID-19 schedule that our patrol officers were working. Not just our patrol officers, really. It was an all hands on deck to maintain the patrol bureau patrol operations, and it was pretty different. Our practices that we had in place, safety protocols in place, were pretty different from what we're doing now, certainly. But what was that like coming here? You were comfortable at this other agency that you'd been at for several years. You came to not only a new agency where you didn't really know anybody or the area or things like that, but we were also really restricted on what some of our interactions could be, not only with each other, but with the public. And like, what was that like?
It was interesting. Like when I started with my first police department, obviously that starting in that agency was completely different than when I started here. Not only the fact that they were different agencies, but the fact that we were wearing masks inside. And I realized after I was on calls that I hadn't seen some of my coworkers' full faces. And I found that out on calls when somebody came in off duty, and I looked at them and I asked who they were. And they looked at me like I was insane. And they're like, I work with you. Oh, okay. Because, I mean, with the COVID schedule and with wearing masks and being so restricted with what we were able to do, I feel like, not that I was necessarily gypped with the initial start, but it was definitely, I feel like, a different start for me than it is for maybe some other people. And that's where I was also extremely thankful that I had law enforcement history, so that starting here wasn't like I was getting fed to the wolves, it kind of felt like. But it was fun. It was a very unique time. I feel like it was a really great time for a lot of camaraderie because we were all kind of struggling through this really weird time together. So I feel like it was a really great time to make a lot of friends and get to know my coworkers kind of in a different way than I would have otherwise.
Yeah. You brought up the training component of it. So maybe compare and contrast a little bit. And it's going to be apples to oranges to a certain degree. Your field training at your first agency, I mean, obviously you were brand new. You didn't really know anything about how to be a police officer. But when you came here, you also had to go through a field training program. But now you have several years experience. You know how to talk to people. You know how to handle a call. But there were things that were probably still pretty different, I would imagine. Like, what was that transition like?
I feel like the transition, it was interesting. It was different than I was expecting, I guess. I didn't realize some of the differences that there were between Fitchburg and here until I actually started here. I knew some of them, but like the 10 codes are different. We use different ones here, and they mean different things here, we're 2 hours away. And the fact that different 10 codes have different meanings, I think is fascinating. But the field training experience, I feel like it was a lot more overwhelming at my old police department because I was new. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was learning everything. And here, I knew the meat and potatoes of the job. I knew how to talk to people, how to arrest people, what the state statutes were, but I didn't know any of the ordinances, and I didn't know I knew some of the policy and procedure because a lot of them similar, but there were ones that I wasn't completely aware of, and different ones that I had to learn, which was fun. It was definitely a little bit of a learning curve, but it was an exciting one. I had a much more funner start here than I did at my other agency. I feel like I came in and I was welcomed in like it was a family pretty quick. And I don't know if that was because of the COVID kind of schedule or the camaraderie, or if it was because I had experience and so they're like, oh, you already know what you're doing, just welcome into the family. Or if it's just Wausau is like that to everybody. But I felt absolutely welcomed, and it was really refreshing.
Well, first of all, that's glad to hear. I mean, first of all, yes, I do hope that we have that kind of welcome for everybody. But secondly, I would imagine you were just able to hit the ground running. You had this experience. Again, I'm guessing the trainers didn't have to teach you how to talk to people or like, hey, here's some good questions you might want to ask in this type of a scenario. Like, I'm sure like that groove you were in, like that's where you felt probably most comfortable as you're learning the geography of the city and, maybe some of the technology changes. I would imagine some of it carried over, but, some of those things certainly are different. So let's stay a little bit on the theme of training, because you were in field training there. You did field training program here. You were also a trainer there. And then a little while after you joined Wausau PD, you became one of our field training officers. Talk about, and we actually just on a couple of podcast episodes ago, we spoke with one of our newest officers who was in phase 4 of training, Officer Garrett Johnson, and his FTO, one of his FTOs, Cody Holder, just to kind of learn what that experience was like for Garrett, how that's going on. And I'll ask you as a field trainer and one who's been through a couple of FTO processes now, what are you looking for? What is it about a field training program that makes it either successful or maybe not as great? What are you as a field trainer looking for in training our new officers? Things that might kind of instill confidence for those that are listening or watching, members of our community, to have faith in our field training program and know that it's an effective program that prepares officers to serve.
The field training program that I was in Fitchburg versus here, I know it's drastically different. And not that we don't have higher standards by any means. We still have very high standards here, and there they do too. But I feel like it's a lot more, if you're not getting it, we're going to mold it and figure out how to get you to get it.
I think you're spot on. I think we've learned a lot in these field training programs, and just I think as people, like how different individuals learn differently. And instead of, to your point, just being like, hey, you're not making it, you're out of here because we got 800 people that are lining up to apply and be the next contender. We just don't have that anymore. And I think you're right, where we take that charge much more seriously to say, hey, like if they're not cutting it, maybe it's something we're not quite doing right. And we're willing to kind of learn what that is. Because we're not teachers, right? Because we're police officers and we're trying to figure that out. And I think we've made some really good strides.
I agree. And I've realized after training several people and having some successes and having some failures that I'm a very type A personality, like most police officers are. But sometimes I forget that I need to change how I teach to whoever I'm training. And I need to train maybe in a way that's more appropriate for them. And sometimes I know that I'm a little bit more of a tougher field trainer. And that's just because I know I have high standards for myself, but I have high standards for others. And it's not because I want anybody to fail, because that's the last thing I want. But I want everybody to be the best that they can. And so I hold them to a little bit of higher standards, and I feel like maybe that could be taken the wrong way. But it's because I know that they're capable of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that comes off the wrong way. But I mean, my ultimate goal is I want everybody to succeed, and I'm really excited for all of the people that I'm working with.
You are a person, I think, who is very comfortable driving others to bring out the best in them and not content with striving for mediocrity. If I were to make a play on what our vision is, we want to strive for excellence. And and I think the thing that helped me understand most about who is Claire Ostrowski is when you were telling me about a skill that you did not feel comfortable with and the steps that you took to become more comfortable with that. And maybe you can just share a little bit about that, what that was and kind of where you are today with that.
I'm assuming you're talking about firearms.
Yes, I was trying to think of something smart alecky to say, but yes, it was the firearms.
I'll be very blunt. When I was in the academy, I had held a handgun once before. I had shot a shotgun twice. And when I first started, I sucked. I was horrible. I had to spend countless hours with a firearms instructor with Fitchburg. He would, out on his own time, would go to the range with me because Madison had an indoor range. We would go to this range several times a week after the academy, and I would practice. And it took a lot of work. And that sergeant, he was amazing in his patience with me because I was not good at all. And when I first held the gun, it actually kind of scared me. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this because that's a lot of power in something that I am holding. And then after practicing and after getting more comfortable with it, I started to get better, but I still didn't feel like I was comfortable. And so I kept working on it. And I would then go with my parents to a range where my mom was also learning how to shoot a gun. And so it was kind of fun. It was like a bonding experience that we had. And my dad got to have his little tomboy girl that he always wanted because my poor dad had 4 girls in total. So he never really had his son to go hunting and everything with. So he got to kind of experience that a little bit more, where I was able to do some more of those tomboys experience. And I practiced and I practiced and I practiced, and to the point where I then felt comfortable. And this was over the course of 4 years before I was like, I feel like I'm good.
Yeah. But that wasn't enough.
No. And I knew what I had gone through with the struggle as somebody that's a female and as somebody that's smaller with, like, I don't have great big hands. And some of these men, they have big hands that we work with, and they can hold these guns, and it's super easy for them to maintain control. I have smaller hands, so I have to manipulate it in slightly a different way, or I have to be a lot more mindful about how I'm holding the firearm. And I realized with everything that I had done to help myself and all of the struggles that I would go through and everything that I learned, that I wanted to be able to help other people, specifically other females potentially, to succeed the way that I had found success with firearms. So then I became an instructor for firearms with Fitchburg, which was really fun. That was probably one of my favorite trainings I've ever been to. I was the only female in the entire course. It was about 20 men.
Okay.
I was the only female. But nobody treated me any different. And I was like one of the guys in that sense where nobody looked down upon me, where they're like, ooh, you're a female. You're not going to do well here. And it was a great time. And I feel very, very happy and very proud to be a female that's a firearms instructor. And I still, it's not something that comes naturally to me. Like some people, they pick up a handgun and they can aim and they can get the bullseye right away. I still have to practice consistently so that I can maintain my success, for lack of a better word,
Sure.
To be able to continue to be decent.
Yeah. And you've maintained that certification because
Yes.
you're a firearms instructor for our agency now.
Yes.
So going from something that you felt was maybe a little bit of a deficiency, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, to, hey, I'm feeling comfortable now and I feel proficient, to, hey, now I'm actually going to teach other people how to develop and implement this skill. Again, I just think that for me, when I had first heard that, told me a lot of about who you are and the type of person that you are. So maybe others understand that now a little bit as well. So you said something when I first met you. I think it might have been maybe in one of your first interviews. When you came here, you were talking very positively about your previous agency, had some really good experiences there, but you were also looking for additional opportunities to engage with the community. And we're hopeful that you were going to find that here in the Wausau area. So I'll ask, like, has that panned out? Has that been your experience, having this connection to the community as a member of this department? And like, what does that look like for you?
Fitchburg was just a smaller area.
Sure.
And it was a suburb of a very big city. And so I feel like a lot of the public kind of events, forums, those opportunities, most of them went to the city of Madison or to Dane County. And I feel like at Fitchburg, I didn't really have a ton of those opportunities as much. And coming here, I was excited hearing about how much Wausau works with the community and how much the community supports Wausau, which when I came here was peak time where people hated the police. And knowing that people were so supportive of Wausau still was amazing to me, and I was really excited. And coming here, I feel like I always want more. I'm somebody that I always kind of strive for what's next. I do feel like being here, I have had way more opportunities than I ever had at my other police department. A lot of it is because of the size of Wausau in comparison.
Sure.
But it's the fact that we have also such an amazing community bond. I've been able to be a part of neighborhood meetings here. I've been able to go to some assisted living facilities and explain when to call 911 and when to not. I've been able to go to the Boys and Girls Club and talk to the kids and introduce myself. And I've been able to have a lot more of these opportunities with really different groups and categories of the community that I've been able to meet. We've done tours at the police department with a bunch of homeschooled kids. And I've actually then had calls with these kids, and it was cute because it was a cute bond, and they were all excited to see me. And even though it was maybe not the best contact in that moment, that it still lent to a very positive outcome.
Sure. So you have shown up periodically, like in our social media, for example. Mm-hmm. So while right now a viewer or listener might get this impression that you're somewhat this reserved person as you're sitting here behind a microphone and you're kind of giving these, I don't want to say guarded, that's not the term. Like you're a pretty open book for the most part. But that's not really who you are. Like you're this super bubbly, connect with everybody. And when I say you show up in our social media every once in a while, it's usually in some picture where you're doing something fun or silly with members of the community. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they send us those pictures, or sometimes we just happen to get those, whether it's with some kind of an animal or a snake draped across your shoulders, or, hanging out with kids riding around a little toy car, or like whatever it might be, you just always seem to be kind of in the thick of those things going on. So even when talking from a community engagement standpoint, yes, we do have these opportunities for you to go to like those scheduled neighborhood meetings or presentations or things like that. But I think also where a lot of people might not know this otherwise, where you really shine is you're just out there every day as a patrol officer. And it's like, no matter what the call is, like if there's an opportunity to be kind of, I don't know, engaging or goofy or silly or make someone's day a little bit brighter, like you are usually that person who is first stepping forward to do that. Which that's been a great thing for our department. Hopefully it's been fun for you, because it definitely isn't an act. Like that's just who you are all the time. Correct me if I'm wrong, so feel free.
I have a blast here. I have some coworkers that if I want to go do something, or if they're like considering it, they'll be like, hey, do you wanna? And we kind of push each other and we go do goofy things. I think one of the first videos that I was ever in at Wausau was I was sledding down Tomfield Hill with Officer Harish, who was my field training officer for that day. And he's like, there's a bunch of kids sledding. You want to go sled? I'm like, that sounds fantastic. And what also didn't make the video is that it was like a tube, I went straight into the fence, and Officer Harish thought he killed me briefly. But it was, we just kept going and we just had a lot of fun. And I love to be able to connect with people on calls in ways other than whatever we're there for in that moment. So there's a picture of me with a snake around me. That is not even a little bit about why we were at that house. But one of my coworkers thought it would be funny because he thought it was going to scare me. I'd be like, hey, look, there's a snake. I was like, ooh, no, I love that. Like I like snakes. Spiders, I don't like spiders. I have run away on calls on spiders. But when it comes to snakes, I just find it fun. And I just think it's a fun way of bonding with the community and talking about completely different reasons than why you're there, but learning people and building rapport and having fun. And
the memories that they're going to have too of you.
Exactly. And this job is fun. It doesn't always need to be serious.
Yeah.
And that's where we have the most enjoyment with this job, is when we get to actually have those connections.
Oh, absolutely.
And I have a lot of fun.
I think you see some of this, like let's, for example, take one of these pictures, like the snake picture, for example. People will either comment on a photo like that and say like, oh, Officer Claire was at my home the other day. Oh, she's the best, or whatever. But a lot of times we'll get phone calls or we'll get emails, the command staff will, about our officers interacting out in the community. And it really isn't uncommon where, hey, Officer Claire Ostrowski and others came, and boy, she did a fantastic job and was able to make this connection, or made these great memories for my kids, or like whatever the case may be. So I think that just gives a little bit of the flavor of the kind of person that you are and the fun that you have in this job, which I think we can agree is a pretty serious job. And you and I were talking again about this the other day. The work that we do is really serious. The implications of this job can be really serious. But I don't know that we need to take ourselves so seriously all the time. We can go out and we can have fun, and you definitely embody that. Absolutely.
I agree.
We talked a little bit about FTO and your firearms role, things like that. But one unique thing that maybe gives you an additional, perspective on law enforcement, on dealing with families, is your own family life. So your spouse is in law enforcement, right? Maybe talk a little bit about that. How is it to have that individual after work? Like, let's say it was a lousy day. You're able to go home and you have somebody right there that can truly identify with what that's like to handle a very difficult call, and know what you're going through. Anything about that stands out to you?
It definitely makes life interesting, having a husband that is also in law enforcement, because our everyday is insane. We're kind of we have 2 children and we're basically solo parenting. It seems like every other day because we work opposite schedules.
Okay.
But being able to have somebody that understands is one of my favorite things about our relationship. Because if I have a hard day where I've had really horrible calls and I can call him and he's not like, ooh, that sucks. What do you want for dinner? He's like, ooh, that sucks. Let's go for a walk and talk.
Yeah.
And we understand each other in a little bit of a different sense and have a bond with work where also we understand if I'm like, hey, I got to be late because I am doing this. He's like, oh yeah, I totally get that, because he understands that I'm not choosing to be late for these reasons, is that I have to be for the job. There's a different level of understanding that we really appreciate. I know there's plenty of people in this job that when they go home, they don't want anything to do with it anymore. And they want to close the day off, close the chapter, just be done, not talk about work. But my husband and I both love to talk about our day because that's kind of how we work through it. And it's been one of the best things for both of us, that even when there's really, really nasty things that we've both dealt with, that's how we kind of cope with everything. And it makes it really fun and exciting to kind of always have each other there to understand, knowing that even if you have a crappy day, they get it.
Yeah.
And it's fun to also when things are happening and I'm really excited about something and I'm trying to tell a quick story because I only have a few minutes until I got to go do something else, that I can use more of like the cop lingo and be like, hey, oh, it was this. And he's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, be safe, whatever. And then we move on. But it's really great. And we're both very fortunate.
Yeah. What a cool dynamic. So think back to when you first started then, keeping this in mind. You didn't have a family. You didn't have children. Has your approach to policing or the lens through which you look at maybe certain calls changed since you've had kids, since you've got married? Like, and I'm only thinking about that through like when you said, hey, there's some really difficult calls at times. And I suppose there's been an evolution in my own thinking as I've had kids and as they've gotten older, or as I see different struggles on calls that we go to, and then everybody experiences struggles in their life. Like, how do you feel that your perspective on helping others resolve concerns in their life has changed or been enhanced by your own kind of family dynamic in life?
I feel like when it comes to my approach on calls specifically, I have a lot more patience now. Because with kids comes patience. But I also, certain calls that didn't affect me internally as much affect me different now,
Sure.
Specifically if kids are involved. Because I have a very strong mama bear kind of drive. And so if things involve kids, not that I didn't handle them seriously before, but I feel like I handle or understand them in a little bit of a different sense now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if like looking specifically back on when I first started it at how I may have handled a call versus handling it now, if I would have done anything different, but I feel like maybe I have more thoughts or opportunities or avenues that I feel like maybe could be explored and I go more in depth than maybe I have in the past if children are involved specifically.
Do you feel like an additional sort of facet of empathy has gone along with, like, I'm just thinking, hey, if I'm a 20-something-year-old new police officer and I don't know what it's like to raise children, and now I'm at a home where there's been a incident involving young family, children, or like whatever, I can do my very best to be professional and understand that. But can I really understand that until I've experienced that for myself? I mean, maybe that's part of it, do you think? Or?
Absolutely. I definitely understand, specifically if parents are like, oh, this is what's going on and my kids are this age. I'm like, oh, I get that because I just went through something similar, or I've seen that, or I know potentially different ways to handle things. And a lot of it is also I know how to interact with some kids now, because when I first got hired, I was 21, 22 when I actually hit the road. I don't think I really ever dealt with a kid before. I never really had younger kids than me in my life. I'm the youngest, some of the youngest in my family. So I never really knew how to interact with kids well. And so I always felt like kind of a little bit awkward on calls that involved kids until I had my own. And now, like, oh, this is how you can talk to kids, or this is how you can interact with them. And I feel like I don't feel as stupid trying to talk to kids. Like the kids, like I understand a little bit more, and I can have conversations with them and kind of talk at their level, because I've seen what level kids are with different ages. So it definitely gave me a completely different perspective, especially after I had both of my kids and coming back to the road. I feel like both times, anything that involved a young kid affected me significantly more than it did before. But, and not that I didn't take it seriously before, I feel like it did help me to really make sure that I was doing everything, absolutely everything that I could for some of these kids.
Sure.
And helped me to really want to be more involved with kinds of these calls with kids, where when I was on light duty here, when I was pregnant with my last child, that I was more involved with a lot of those investigations with with the Child Advocacy Center, and going to forensic interviews with children. And part of that was, I found that I'm very interested in that specifically was after having kids. And I was always excited and liked. Excited is the wrong word, because the forensic interviews are always because something bad happened. But I think it's a really awesome opportunity and awesome resource that the community has, not only to learn more information on a forensic level, but help kids go through these incidents. And while I always was interested in it, I had a little bit more of a greater interest and greater respect for it after having children.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And to really see those young people thrive afterward, after something like that happens, which I'm sure is extremely difficult. So reflecting on 10 years of law enforcement experience now, what do you think have been some of the greatest challenges for you throughout that? I mean, yes, we could talk about like, hey, I hadn't shot a gun before when I first started. But I mean, like you worked through that thing, like, but 10 years of law enforcement experience, and, you got some years ahead of you here. What have been some of the bigger challenges so far? And what maybe do you anticipate being challenges in the future? I mean, maybe that's a little too like, you don't have a crystal ball necessarily, but we'll stick with what's been our challenges so far.
A lot of it is I've learned a lot about myself, a lot about how I cope with trauma and how I cope with things that I've seen or things that I've dealt with. I've learned a lot about myself in developing patience and really making myself, I feel like, a better person. I mean, everybody has work to do, obviously. But I feel like I was forced more than I would have been otherwise to work on myself, but also understand just humans. It's really hard. Some of the challenges I've seen dealt with a lot of the absolute chaos that's gone on around the world. I mean, between all of the riots against police and COVID-19 and countless other things that I can't even think of right now, but I know that there's a lot. Those have all been extremely difficult. I don't know if I have anything specifically that I'm like, that was one of the most difficult things, because I try to take everything as a learning experience, where there's definitely been things that have been hard, and definitely been things that I have felt specifically traumatized by, and things that I have felt objectified by, and things that have made me question everything about if I want to stay in this career, or some of my coworkers, if I ever want to talk to them again because of some things that have been said or done or whatever. But I don't feel like it necessarily is anything different than I could have found in a different career. I know the amount of trauma that we experience is different, but I don't know. I try to take everything as a learning experience, and I don't know if I can think of anything specifically that I'm like, that was the most difficult thing. I feel like everything, I look back at it, and while things are difficult at the time, that there's always going to be something different, and I try not to kind of stick on that as something that is bad.
Well, I think you bring up a really interesting point that I'm not sure a lot of people really understand. I'm not sure that a lot of us understand when we're new in this profession, frankly, which is when you said, I've been through a lot of things that, I've been traumatized by a lot of things. It isn't like we go to these very difficult calls and we somehow work through it by talking with your spouse, for example, or going for a walk, or some people go fishing or work out or whatever, and then it's done. Like, it's always going to be with us in some way, shape, or form. We can mitigate some of those things is sort of what I hear you saying. But it becomes part of who we are to a certain degree. And I suppose we could let those things consume us and be pretty destructive, or we could allow those things, which is maybe what I'm also hearing from you, allow those things to work for our good and allow us to have maybe additional compassion, understanding, patience, all these different things. It just lends maybe greater depth to our experience and our ability to connect with others maybe. It's a tough topic. I mean, we've done that video series behind the call where we've had some officers open up very frankly about some very, very difficult calls. And I think those have been helpful. Those aren't easy calls though to work through. It never quite goes away. It just kind of becomes a bit of who we are, right? Our makeup. So,
yeah.
So then kind of keeping on this theme of, hey, you've been 10 years in law enforcement, like maybe what challenges have been there, pivoting from that, but considering the 10 years and the years you have left, like where do you see yourself going in the next 10 years? You talked a little bit about, hey, there's this kind of self-awareness or introspection that can take place, and that makes me a better person, a better officer, a better call handler, one could argue. But now where do you go from there? Like what's next on the horizon for Claire in terms of the next decade, do you think? And I don't mean like specifically like where do you see yourself? But I mean maybe that's it. But what would you like to accomplish in the rest of your career?
I would love to say that I have a single thing that I know that I want to do. I have a few different prospects of where I want my career to go, and I don't know which one's going to be right, if any of them, because everything changes. And unlike other jobs where you can just wait, like you can, when you feel like you're ready, you can put in for the promotion. For here, a lot of it is also a waiting game. So right now I have a few different options of where I could go, but part of it is when is there going to be the next opening? And that means somebody's either going to quit, somebody needs to retire, somebody is moving into a different position. But I can't explore any of those additional opportunities in that position directly until there is an opening there. And we can never predict specifically. I mean, for somewhat we can when we're like, oh, so-and-so is likely going to retire in the next few years. But it's really hard to know for sure when you're going to be able to apply for those jobs. And if you don't apply for one, is the next one going to open up soon? Or did you just lose an opportunity for the next 4 years?
Yeah. And I'm guessing our department isn't unique in that there's kind of this chess game that goes on in your head where you're like, okay, so-and-so might have this many years before they retire, but if they leave, then this person could move over into there, which would then maybe open that, but they're this old and they might do. So yeah, I get it. You're kind of playing this all out to kind of map out what your own personal career goals are. And that can be difficult for sure.
A chess game is the best way. I've at one of my previous agencies, when we were just trying to figure out where people were going for the shifts, because each year shift picks, we get to choose which shift we go to. And in my other police department, there were 3 shifts. There was day shift, second shift, night shift. And trying to figure out where everybody was going or what positions they were putting in, one of my coworkers literally had an Excel spreadsheet where he put everybody and just tried to anticipate where everybody was going to go and then who had what opportunity for what. And it was hysterical. And he was completely wrong. And so like, even if you think you know what's going to happen, you never know.
You never know what's going to happen. It's so hard to predict those things, which, I mean, maybe a better question would be, or maybe a worse question, I guess I'll let you be the judge. So instead of necessarily, hey, what are these career goals over the next couple years? What if, like, if you knew you're retiring in a year or something like that, like, what would you want your legacy to be? What would you want people to, like, when they're talking about Officer Ostrowski here at the Wausau Police Department, like, what do you want your, to be known for?
I want to be remembered or known for, I mean, it's as simple as I want to be known for being a good cop in whatever that ends up being. I would love more investigative experience in being able to be like, ooh, Claire solved that, or Claire was able to help with this or that or whatever. Or make change in whatever sense for whatever position I end up in, hopefully. But I feel like I have all of these goals and things that I want, but the basis for everything is I just want to be good at my job.
Yeah.
And I want to be remembered for being good at my job, not somebody that, oh, they were retired on duty, or oh, they like to dodge calls or not take their share. I just want to be remembered as a good coworker and somebody that did my job and did it well, which maybe doesn't answer the question in the way that you potentially wanted, but
no, that's helpful.
I feel like it's very basic.
Yeah, and I didn't want it to come off like I'm not asking you to write your obituary here. Like, it sounds like there's this finality to it. Like, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
Like, we get to have Claire here for a long time, which we're grateful for. But maybe shifting a little bit, again, going back a couple of episodes of the podcast, Captain Paul sat down with a few of our female officers and talked about women in policing, some of the unique challenges, the unique abilities also that and contributions that can be made. And I'm not going to rehash all of that. I don't know that I'm qualified to ask or really explore any of those questions. But I will ask you, I mean, because you touched on a little bit before as it relates to the firearms, for example, like what specific challenges to you do you think could be attributed to, hey, I'm a woman in policing, it's generally a male-dominated profession. Have there been challenges? Or maybe a better question would be like, what advice would you have to other women that maybe are feeling inhibited about entering law enforcement because they are perceiving there's going to be all of these challenges? And I think you show us that, hey, challenges are just challenges. They make us better. It's maybe not necessarily because of this, that, or the other thing. Like, to clarify, you absolutely weren't hired here because you're female. You're hired here because of the character that you display and that we're hearing about today. But, I mean, all of us have different sensibilities and aptitudes and abilities and trials. I mean, do you see some of that play out at all in your policing? I asked probably 10 different questions in there, so that probably wasn't really good at all. I don't know what Ethan's going to do with that.
Being a female when I first started back in 2014 versus now does feel very different, because I don't know if it's because of Wausau versus Fitchburg, but I think part of it is also just the general thoughts of female in law enforcement has, I feel like, improved. I am a part of some different like forums for females in law enforcement, and specifically there was one that resonated. There was a question that somebody posed, and it was something similar to what you're saying, where this girl is like, I'm 5'1", I weigh 130 pounds. Am I going to absolutely get destroyed in law enforcement because I'm a small person? And while you can't tell in the podcast, I am 5'1", and I am not a large person.
Were you the one that wrote the question, Claire?
You may have thought so. But one of the things that I've found, and it's whatever each female, I feel like you kind of learn more than maybe some men have to. You have to learn what is like your niche, or what is the thing that makes you, and lack of a better word, but seem as capable as men. One of the things that benefits me the most is that I have a very loud voice, and I mom people a lot, well before I was a mom. But in that question that she posed, I reflected on that and I'm like, I probably thought the same thing, but I also was like, hey, I'm diving into this head first and I'll figure that out later. But it's as a female, not just sitting and thinking, well, I'm a female, so people are going to treat me lesser than. I've made sure that I've tried to put myself in the best position that even though I'm a female, that you can try to take me less seriously, but I may just yell at you more. Which, yes, most of the time I am a fun, bubbly, positive person, but there are definitely when calls need to be serious and I raise my voice, usually I scare some people.
I think you're a very assertive person.
I've been told by one of my coworkers on a specific call that I yelled, and I was yelling at kids that were running away from a stolen vehicle. I yelled at them, and I yelled at them to get on the ground, and my coworker said he thought briefly about also jumping to the ground because I'm screaming at him and because I have a loud and I had a dominating voice. So as a female, I feel like it's trying to figure out what is and as every officer, what is your thing that makes you a good officer? And everybody has their own kind of way of policing. But I know specifically, I feel very confident that if I need to yell at somebody, that I can do so without a megaphone or without the loudspeaker. But that as a female, I don't think that I'm lesser than any of my coworkers. And at Wausau, I'm not made to feel like I'm lesser than any of my coworkers. But I feel very supported here, and all my coworkers are very supportive. And I try to just make sure that I am as qualified, if not more qualified than some of the men coworkers. And maybe that's because I have to try a little bit harder. Like with firearms, I feel like maybe it comes to men a little bit easier. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. But
I think you demonstrated you have that drive anyway. You have those high standards for yourself anyway. And I'm guessing no matter what you're taking on, that you drive yourself pretty hard.
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate here with my coworkers and my friends. And I've had calls where somebody yelled at me and he's like, "You're a female, I'm not listening to you. Female don't belong in law enforcement." And my coworker absolutely ripped that guy a new one. And in a good way. It's not like he violated any kind of policy, protocol, whatever. But he's like, "You don't talk to my coworker that way. You don't degrade her. You need to leave and you cannot act like that." And while we joke about that now, I know without a doubt that I am extremely supported. And I think that that's one of the things that Wausau really benefits is that as a female, we have a lot of females here compared to other agencies, but I feel extremely supported and extremely backed. And my coworkers have shown that time and time again that they're never going to let somebody try to degrade me solely because I'm a female.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great to hear. You said something a little bit ago about kind of, and I'll just paraphrase it here, about sort of developing this style and getting comfortable with kind of who you are and like what kind of policing or, again, just maybe stylistic for lack of a better word. What advice might you have for a young person coming in? I suppose whether they're male or female, it doesn't matter. Is it advisable, like figure out ahead of time, like know who you are, like know yourself, like sort of these existential things? Or I'm guessing this has been somewhat of an evolution for you also throughout 10 years. You come in, you're not quite sure what to expect about this. You start handling calls this way, but then you get some more experience and perspective, and maybe it shifts a little bit more like this, and you're able to draw on those past things. Like, what advice could we have for young people wanting to come into law enforcement by way of preparation to know what kind of an officer they want to be?
While I have a very strong personality, I had no idea who I was when I started. I was a baby. I was 21 hired, 22 first out on the road. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what my style was. And one of the first things that was taught to me in field training at my old agency and here, and something that I try to tell other people that I've trained as well, one of the best things is in field training, you're going to see how your field trainer does things. And traditionally, you have 3 field trainers. Sometimes you have more when there's sick days or vacations, whatnot. You get to see how they all do their job. And then you can, and during those steps, you do what they want to do in their way. But at the end of it, you get to put everybody's different thoughts and ways that they handle things together, and you get to make it your own. And while you can maybe kind of adapt and adopt some of the other your trainers or coworkers' styles, you ultimately have to make it your own because you're not following them around 24/7. So I feel like with this job, I became a lot more confident and a lot more sure of who I am with this job. I had no idea before. And if you have no idea, that's a great thing, because then with this job, depending on where you are too, you can kind of get molded, not against your will, molded, but to how maybe that agency wants you to be. But it also helps you have a kind of a guideline, and you're going to find out either it's the agency for you or it's not. But this career has helped make me who I am, and I feel like in a very positive way. And I'm very fortunate with how I feel that I've become as a person with this job.
Yeah. It's interesting, as you're talking about that with the field trainers, and you're echoing what Officer Holder and Officer Johnson were talking about with their field training experience together, where it's like, hey, you're gonna learn from a few different people, but then you're gonna kind of meld it into your own sort of thing and get into a groove, and you're gonna do it the new officer way, which is maybe a conglomeration of all these different field trainers. I think about like my kids who are in their 20s and they're raising kids of their own and starting to do that. And I see some of the things they're doing. I'm like, that's not how I raised you at home to do that. But it's like super cool to like, they do it their way. And I don't think it's any different here. And, but I suppose there's maybe sometimes that tendency. You see some officer that you trained and now they're out on their own. They've been on their own for a while. And now you're at some call together and they're doing something, and you're like, what are they doing? That's not how I told them to do that. But then you're like, but that works really cool. And you're kind of learning some things from them now too, and having those experiences and seeing them grow and seeing them develop and figure out who they are and how they want to do things. So very cool. Mm-hmm. Touching again on the firearms instructor role, the field training officer role, just a variety of different things that you've been in, and simply just by virtue of being a patrol officer here, like you're in a leadership role. Thinking about your own leadership style, like are there any like real strong role models that you have in your past, in your life? And I don't need to know who they are. I'm not interested, but like what have they taught you about how to lead out, how to try to be the best leader, the best individual that you can be?
So I have a few people that I can think of if anybody ever says like, who's a role model for you? And most of the people that I have directly as role models are because they've been in my life in some way, shape, or form. I have a hard time thinking somebody's a role model that I've never met.
Sure.
And I always just know that I think about how they would have done something, or would they be proud of what I did, or would they be upset or frustrated? And I tried to take what they've taught me and use it as my own. One of the role models that I think about for almost anything that I've done in this career specifically was one of my old sergeants at my other police at Fitchburg. And I remember him doing some things on calls, and I remember some of the things that he would say, and I never understood why he did things or said things. And then after getting married and having children and being in this career for longer, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense now. And having somebody like that, I feel very, very fortunate to have had in my life. And I don't think they have any idea of how much of an impact that I still think about them when I'm on calls and how they handle things. Ultimately, what it comes down to when I think about like my role models is when I do things, I'm like, would they be proud of me? And would they have done something similar, or am I completely off base?
Yeah. Do you consider yourself right now to be in a leadership role?
I know I can be. I know with certain people have come to me with like questions, some of the newer officers. And I feel very proud when people come to me and I'm like, oh, I actually kind of know what I'm doing. Because I still sometimes feel like I'm a baby in this career because everything is new. And half the time that's one of the fun things about this job is you can be in this career for 10 years and go to a call that you have never experienced or have any idea how to handle, and you just got to figure it out. But I feel very proud when people come to me and ask questions and they're like, oh, I actually know what I'm doing. And so sometimes I feel like I'm in a leadership role, and sometimes I just know that I have so much left to learn. Especially when I'm a field training officer, I feel like I'm in a leadership role, or when I'm instructing, because I'm an instructor for a couple of things as well, or with various things that I'm doing. So sometimes I sit back and I just watch other people and I'm like, they did that really cool, or I can't wait to learn more from them, and I love to still be taught as much as I do teach other people.
Sure. Well, any parting thoughts here? Any final impressions of our conversation, or for our conversation? We're excited that we've had you here since 2020. We're looking forward to a whole bunch more years, but I don't know, anything else that you'd like to share?
I'm very happy to be here.
We'll come up with a better ending for you here, Ethan.
I think that it's important, and I think our police department has done a really great job of showing that the community about who us as officers are as humans, but also showing like females can do a whole lot, and sometimes you just got to put your mind to it, and you can do anything that you want. If I can give anybody hope of maybe doing this job when they thought that they couldn't before, or just seeing that Wausau is a fun place to be. Because I can say, before I came here, before I actually applied at the police department, I don't think I had ever been into Wausau before.
Okay.
Which, then being here, I'm like, I don't know how I had never been here before, because Wausau is a really fun place to be.
Right?
It is. It's a hidden gem. It's not so hidden, but to me it was. But it's a really great place, and I think that if people hadn't thought about coming here before, that it's a great place to consider.
Well, Claire, we are super excited to have you here. You joined us in 2020. You quickly became a super important part of the department, of the PD family. And maybe after a little while, maybe in a couple more years, we'll sit down again and we'll see if things, how things have changed, how some of these things have panned out, and kind of where things are headed for you at that point. But really appreciate you taking the time and sitting down today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.